California Governor Gavin Newsom has ordered California state officials to begin dismantling thousands of homeless encampments following the recent Supreme Court ruling that empowers cities to enforce bans on sleeping outside in public. The executive order directs state agencies and departments to develop, quote, clear policies to urgently address the issue. And for context, California has about 1/3 of the nation's population of homeless people. Newsom said there was nothing more frustrating and urgent than addressing the problem. Let's watch.
I don't think there's anything more urgent and more frustrating than addressing the issue of encampments in the state of California. Over the course of the last number of years, the state has stepped up, where in the past we provided no support, no resources to cities and counties to clean up encampments like this. Today, we've invested now over $1 billion in encampment resolution grants, not only to clean up sites like this, but to address the underlying issue in the first place. One of the big issues, though, that has been an impediment was the courts. In the past, the courts have denied the ability for local government, including the state, to clean up many of these encampments. Today, I announced an executive order to move the process forward. We're done. It's time to move with urgency at the local level to clean up these sites, to focus on public health and focus on public safety. There are no longer any excuses. $1 billion this state has invested to support communities to clean up these encampments. We have now no excuse with the Supreme Court decision. This executive order is about pushing that paradigm further and getting a sense of urgency that's required of local government to do their job.
Joining us now to discuss it all is Tenant Union Federation Director Tara Raghuveer. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Newsom's really framing this as, we did everything we could. It's like he offered everyone a house and they said no, and that's why they're doing this. This doesn't seem like an issue you can throw $1 billion at in any direction and resolve. San Francisco, for example, has about 10% of the houses in the city vacant. They have 5 times plus the amount of vacant units as they do in a population experiencing homelessness. It doesn't feel like the resolution was relevant to the problem. What do you make of his move now?
So Governor Newsom's move is craven. It's inhumane. It also is ineffective, and it's not actually going to solve for the homelessness crisis in California. And other state and local officials would be wise to move in the opposite direction, because this is really not the solution to homelessness anywhere. We live in the richest country in the history of the world, and over 650,000 people sleep on the streets every night. Over 180,000 of those people live in California. And the solution to homelessness is not handcuffs. The solution is actually homes. And California has repeatedly fallen short of meeting the housing needs of people in its state, including building affordable housing supply, but also regulating the rent so that people can actually afford to stay where they live.
So we saw that a couple of years ago, especially during the pandemic in California, there was an effort to rehome some of the individuals who were living on the streets, mostly in hotels. And unfortunately, what ended up happening was the hotels fell into disarray because they were not treating some of the underlying issues involving these people, whether it's mental illness or drug addiction. So how does that factor into the equation of preventing homelessness?
Sure. There's degrees of homelessness, right? Some people are chronically homeless, and some are episodically homeless or maybe housing insecure and end up on the streets in their cars or doubling up with people in shared housing situations. Now, some people who live on the streets and are homeless are people who also have mental illnesses and they need some treatment and support. And instead of criminalizing those people, locking them up or moving them out of sight, we should be doing everything we can to care for them and to provide not only short-term housing and hotels, but actually permanent, stable housing and wraparound services to get them what they need to not just survive, but also thrive in those new circumstances.
I really think about this as just an economic failure on Newsom's part, and wherever it happens in America, a lot of people say, economists specifically and really centrist Democrats and Republicans, that the economy is good when, inflation is down and Wall Street has good projections for the future. I think the economy is good when people use it for what it's for. It's a system for people meeting their material wants and needs. It's a place where people work, money is exchanged, they build things, they provide services. And if one of the most basic necessities is not being provided for people who need it, it's an economic failure. And so how do we more clearly define this as an economic failure on Newsom's part or wherever it exists with some of the tenants that you work with that are maybe episodically homeless or housing insecure, or even chronically homeless? Can you point to clear economic failures that cause this?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the crisis that California faces in relationship to people living outside and sleeping on the streets is an indictment of the economic regime that both Democrats and Republicans have seen through across the country. And that's an economic regime that prioritizes profit over everything else, and specifically profit over people's lives. Real estate capital is one of the most potent forces in what we call the American democracy, right? But the real estate lobby controls almost every element of housing policy, and they've evaded regulation for years and years and years, to the extent that we see these types of economic failures all around us. It's what you described. There are 5 times more vacant units than there are unhoused people. And yet we can't design policy solutions to actually put people in homes because we're too busy prioritizing building new market rate housing and padding the pockets of already uber wealthy real estate investors.
You mentioned in one of your previous answers that you don't believe the solution is criminalizing homelessness. And while I agree to an extent, when it comes to the question of drug addiction in particular, we do know that perhaps facing criminal consequences does incentivize people to go into treatment facilities. And otherwise, I mean, obviously you can't force people to go get treatment, whether for mental illness or drug addiction. So what are some other ways that we can incentivize people to go into programs when they do need treatment, but maybe aren't capable of saying yes themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, to your first point, the evidence suggests that sweeping encampments and displacing people, punitive measures are by and large ineffective. There's actually nothing that proves that that is an effective way of dealing with homelessness or treating mental illness or pushing people to seek treatment who otherwise might not have. The big question I have about Newsom's order is, where are these folks supposed to go, right? Where are people supposed to go when they're displaced from their encampments and their belongings are dismantled? I'm no mental health expert, but that doesn't seem like the best path to put people in a place to stabilize and become healthy if they are not healthy. Now, what I will say is that I think there are amazing service providers out there whose roles need to expand, and they probably need more support to meet people where they're at and provide both harm reduction support and also support for people who are interested in seeking treatment to do so, and to do so from their own volition and not from a place of punishment by the state. I think it's a really slippery slope, actually, if we say that the state is going to get to determine people's mental fitness to the extent that they get to push them into some kind of treatment that they may or may not have chosen for themselves.
Earlier in the show, we watched a clip of Kamala Harris at RuPaul's Drag Race where she told people, "Your vote is your power." I think power can come from many places in a time when a lot of people are talking about electoral politics. And this is an issue that both sides have failed to address as it exists and systemically. Where do you see people finding power in resolving this? Is it tenant unions? Are there avenues for people to address, the greed they're seeing from landlords across the country, corporate landlords too? It's going to take a long time for Linda Khan to address the antitrust concerns there, but immediately, what can people do?
Yeah, absolutely. People are finding power in tenant unions across the country. I think increasingly there's a reckoning that everyday people are having in relationship to their monthly bills, right? Rent is the biggest bill that most of us pay every month, and the rent is too damn high. It has been for a long time, and people are fed up. And something's got to give. So people are starting to organize in tenant unions. Unions are starting to organize among each other nationwide. We're building something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. And I should add, too, that unhoused people have organized in similar ways for decades. Here in Kansas City, just a few years ago, the homeless formed a union across encampments, and they staged an encampment actually on the lawn of City Hall for more than 2 months. And that resulted in some of the, similar commitments where they ended up in sort of short-term housing situations in hotels. The city made really big promises, and then the city never kept those promises. And unfortunately, many of those people are back on the streets today. But I think that story is actually representative of the truth, which is that power for the most marginalized in our society often won't come at the ballot box, and it will come when they get together and they start to take collective action.
All right, Tara, thank you so much for joining us today on Rising. We appreciate you.
Thank you.